welcome to episode 294 of the Daily Fantasy Edge. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the analysts here at DraftKings. I am the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry. And we are coming off of a perfect week. And what I mean by that is, for me, this week 9 slate was the ideal kind of lineup construction. Jalen Samuels, DJ Moore, Mike Williams, Jarvis Landry, Curtis Samuel, Jack Doyle, Greg Olsen. We had a bunch of sub 5K players with what I thought were really solid floors and really strong ceilings, particularly at the wide receiver position where, Big Mike and Landry and Samuel and DJ Moore, they were all really good buy low candidates at sinking prices. They were in the buy low model. In other words, their recent production was not in line with their recent opportunity. And you can say the same thing for Zach Ertz as well, which I'm going to talk about more in a little bit. So anyways, when we have these cheap wide receivers with upside, we have some cheap tight end options, and we have really strong running back plays. Yeah, I mean, that's perfect for me. That's the way I prefer to build. Let's do that. And I know some people will say, oh, well, this is dumb. Everyone knows what to do. Everyone knows, play Jalen Samuels and McCaffrey and yada, yada, yada. Well, okay, let's start with cash. In the $25 single entry double up, 17% of the field didn't play Samuels. 51% of the field didn't play Christian McCaffrey. Let that sink in for a minute. It's just 17% of people not playing Samuels is absolutely insane. And then 51% not playing Christian McCaffrey when we have access to Samuels and those cheap wide receivers is equally insane. I got a question from FF Consigliere. He said, given that Jalen Samuels was only 67% owned in low stakes double ups, can we extrapolate and conclude that roughly 1/3 of all humans are brain dead? I thought that was funny, but I don't know. I didn't see Jalen Samuels as low as 67% in any cash, but maybe the Consigliere did, maybe at low stakes or micro stakes. But, people say, oh, well, yeah, Adam, I get it, but $25 double up, whatever. Okay. How about the $100 single entry double up? In that, 9% still didn't play Jalen Samuels. 48% still didn't play Christian McCaffrey. And I'd also note that in that $100 double up single entry, Danny freaking Amendola was 23% at 4,700. 23% on Danny Amendola at 4,700, just below Big Mike Williams, DJ Moore, Jarvis Landry. They were all in the 24 to 30% range. So yeah, these kind of weeks, I've called them prove it weeks before. They're great. Sharp people end up winning. My good buddy, my partner, Andrew Wiggins, aka Makasupa, had a great day. Dink had a great day. Love to see it. I'd also add that in weeks like this, as the game evolves, people level themselves even in tournaments. And I think it was obvious or clear, it should have been, that Russell Wilson was the best raw projection quarterback on the slate, like easily, and had, very clear stack options with Metcalf and Lockett. The tight end typically isn't heavily involved, although I know Jacob Hollister was. Chris Carson not hugely involved in the pass game and the running backs, etc. So, it's really clear not much of a third wide receiver presence. So, from a tournament perspective and from just a equity perspective, Russ was clearly the best. But it turned out in the Millie Maker, Russ was only 13% owned. Matthew Stafford was 15.8% owned, right? I think people are leveling themselves there. Another one that I'd say is Dalvin Cook in the Millie Maker was 31% owned. Christian McCaffrey was 24% owned. I think these are examples of people knowing they're taking the worst of a median outcome, by a little bit in an effort to gain ownership leverage. But really, they ended up leveling themselves because Stafford was owned more than Russ and Dalvin was owned more than CMC. So I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit here when we get to listener questions. But yeah, I just thought that was notable. I also wanted to mention defense/special teams quickly. If you guys have been following the cash lineup reviews that I've been doing in my lineups on DraftKings for really the last few years, you notice how often I'm paying down at defense. And honestly, I've been running absurdly hot with it this year. I don't have the data in front of me, but I feels like I've been getting 10 plus points from defenses under 2,500 at a really high rate this year, which is certainly super lucky. But that's kind of the point, right? the point is that defense is incredibly hard to project because turnovers are somewhat random and defense/special teams touchdowns are wildly random. So, of course, I want to spend the least where I can project it the worst. Like the Bills defense, I thought was, from an expectation perspective, the best defense on the slate, home against Dwayne Haskins and the Redskins. The Bills defense dominated. They only allowed 5 yards per play, only 243 total yards for the Redskins, 12 first downs, held them to 0 touchdowns. They only scored 9 points. But the Bills defense only scored 8 DraftKings points. Steelers defense, for 1,400 less, certainly played worse, right? They gave up 24 points to Brissett/Hoyer, but they got 5 sacks. They got the pick 6. They went off for 19 points. So the point is that, the Bills were going to play the best defense. It doesn't mean that we can afford or should to spend up for them, particularly in cash, I think, where it's where every dollar is so important, especially on tight weeks. And I know that looks dumb when the Patriots are going off for 20 or 25 points every week. Like, I get it. But I think even the Patriots' rate of special defensive touchdowns is just absolutely absurd, and there's so much variance involved in that. All right, let's get to the 4-man, and Peter was able to take it down despite playing dusty old Danny Amendola, which I can't believe he did, but he did. Big difference maker for Peter in getting this win was twofold. First, he was the only one to play Zach Ertz. And look, obviously, in hindsight, Ertz at 4,700, given their wide receiver situation, given the spot, 4,700 is just egregiously cheap for Zach Ertz. Only 1,200 more than Greg Olsen, who I really liked. I liked Ertz a lot. Again, Ertz was in the buy low model. It was a really good time to buy the dip in his price. And so, I have some regrets about not making it more of a point for me to get to Zach Ertz at just 4,700. And the other difference maker for Peter was not playing Dalvin Cook and getting on Josh Jacobs instead. And, when a guy is 9,500, like Dalvin Cook, we need to be very, very picky. And maybe I wasn't picky enough because I played Dalvin Cook, and I think we know that Dalvin Cook does not have the same role as Christian McCaffrey, right? Christian McCaffrey plays literally 100% of the snaps, literally is like the option at the goal line, is so involved in the pass game. He does, Christian McCaffrey doesn't lose reps in the red zone to Alexander Madison at times, and he doesn't lose some third down reps to Amir Abdullah. That just doesn't happen. So Dalvin played 80% of the snaps, still went over 100 total yards, had 4 catches, but at 9,500 on the road in Arrowhead, where offenses can struggle, maybe Dalvin wasn't the best. And on Josh Jacobs, I like Josh Jacobs a lot. I'll talk about a tournament team I had Josh Jacobs on. It makes me uncomfortable in cash to pay 6,200 for a guy who has a projection. I mean, literally 0 catches is firmly in the range of outcomes on any given week for Josh Jacobs. And that's what happened. He had 0 catches, but he went over 100 yards. He scored twice. And it was certainly an awesome matchup. And, obviously you save 3,300 off of Dalvin. I mean, just a massive number to save 3,300. So nice job there by Peter. Congrats to him. As for me, I thought there were 4 just stone locks for cash on DK: Jalen Samuels, Christian McCaffrey, Jarvis Landry, Mike Williams. I mentioned how I thought Dalvin was pretty close to a lock too. But in terms of combos after that, I just really couldn't get comfortable. Thought it was really close. I wanted DJ Moore, but I also wanted Chris Godwin. I wanted Russ Wilson, but I preferred, not to spend on a quarterback, I prefer not to spend on a quarterback, period, but I prefer not to spend on a quarterback whose offense, in certain game flows, the offense just goes into a shell when the Seahawks get leads. Let's get to the Listener League, and the Listener League was down to 4K entries in week 9, but still flat payouts, no rate, can't beat that. You better know how to get into the Listener League by now. DK Playbook, find the logo, find the link. In first place was BFITZER, and he got Russ Wilson at 11%, Tyler Lockett at 16%, and Mike Evans at 12%. I mean, just obviously, like from an outcome perspective, that was the nut stack, but it was a really easy one to get on too, right? Like Russ Lockett, bring it back with Mike Evans was just like, man, I mean, you don't need to be some kind of savant or some genius to realize that was one of the best three-man stacks on the slate. So BFITZER faded, Christian McCaffrey faded, Dalvin, went Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs at running back. Preston Williams, 16%. He got Curtis Samuel at 5%. And I think Curtis Samuel was 4,300 in a really good matchup against the Titans at home. Curtis Samuel would have been higher owned in that situation if he didn't come in with a questionable issue because of his shoulder. But if you followed closely what the Panthers were saying, it really wasn't a concern. And yeah, he played 4 wide receivers and he spent most of his cap, or he did, a lot of his cap. He didn't play CMC. He didn't play Dalvin at wide receiver. And historically speaking, Christian McCaffrey is kind of breaking molds, but historically speaking, wide receivers always have a higher ceiling than running backs, and why they've typically been spend up at GPP kind of plays. They don't have the same floor. They have a much wider range of outcomes than expensive running backs. But yeah, I mean, expensive wide receivers, they're relatively cheaper on DraftKings these days, and they have a higher ceiling. So like that construction from BFITZER. See you in the 4-man. In second place was D Cunningham 015. Obviously Russ, Lockett, and Evans. And he also had Preston Williams, just like BFITZER. You feel bad for Preston Williams, man. I mean, what a year he had as an undrafted free agent. Not only to dominate offseason, but make the team and turn into a starter and turn into a productive starter. So hate to see him go down with the ACL. But anyways, D Cunningham had a little bit chalkier build. Jalen Samuels, who was 80% in this listener league. Christian McCaffrey. D Cunningham got David Montgomery at 0.2%. And, I didn't like David Montgomery at Philly, but 0.2% is pretty insane for a guy who had clearly established himself as the feature back. D Cunningham also had Redskins defense at 28%. And it worked out for D Cunningham here. He ended up being able to build the team that he wanted. He finished in second place. When a cheap defense like that is 28%, and more and more people are paying down at defense, and more people are identifying that, the Jets 1,500 and we had a couple spots like the Panthers were 2K and now the Redskins 1,800. Like more and more people are playing that. And when we start to get Redskins defense at 28%, well, that's not great for tournaments because, God, I mean, the likelihood that you have to have them to win a slate is so low. And then even if they do play well when they're 28%, it doesn't even help us that much. So in tournaments, I'm trying to stay off those punt defenses, even though I think they're fine in cash. But nice job by D Cunningham 015. Congrats on your second place finish. A total Big E in third place. He had Russ, no Lockett. He had Russ, Metcalf, Mike Evans. And then McCaffrey, Samuels, Jacobs at running back. Noah Fant, 6%. Quickly on Noah Fant. No role change for Noah Fant. I mean, he's had a pretty good role all year. The only difference why Noah Fant hit was he had the 75-yard touchdown, which was like the worst tackling from the Browns I've ever seen. He was just like running through dudes, like 8 dudes. So, we knew that Noah Fant had passed to big games because his usage has been awesome. I guess you could say it was a matter of time before he broke off a big one because of his athletic skill set. But yeah, I mean, that 75-yard touchdown was ridiculous. And then total biggie also had Mike Williams, who I thought was really, really strong. Congrats to him. As for my best GPP team, well, I had 5 or 6 GPP teams this week. Obviously, the cash team that scored 203 was my best score of the week, but I did have a GPP team do okay, 192 points, had Stafford, Marvin, Waller, Josh Jacobs for a game stack in that Detroit-Oakland game that I really liked. Jalen Samuels, obviously. Got Jordan Howard at 4%. Went back and forth between having Jordan Howard or Melvin Gordon in that spot. Maybe should have been Melvin there. I don't know. But Jordan Howard was certainly a fine play at 4%. Curtis Samuel, 4%. I mentioned why I thought he was underowned. And then, paid up for Bills defense. And that was something that I knew the Bills defense would be underowned because they were expensive. Salary was tight. They just had the highest expectation. I think they were only like 13% or something like that. Before we get to listener questions, I wanted to mention the rate cut on DraftKings on non-guaranteed games over $100. Everyone knows this podcast is sponsored by DraftKings. I've worked with them for like 5 years now, so you can say whatever you want, but it's really a legit like good thing. Basically, the 109s are now 107s to win 200. Any non-guaranteed contest, head-to-head, non-guaranteed 50-50 or whatever. The 215s are now 210 to win 400. The 5300 is now 5200. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot relative to the stakes, but it does make a noticeable difference in the long run if you're playing a lot of volume. So, head-to-heads at higher stakes now, rake is below 5%, and you're really not going to find that often in gambling outside of peer-to-peer stuff. Got a question from Christopher Rooney. He said, what do you think about lower volume cash game players targeting the higher entry fee head-to-heads now that the rate came down? Obviously stiffer competition at higher stakes. Like instead of playing 50 each at the $1, $2, $3 levels, move up. Curious your thoughts on this. I have two thoughts. First, I don't think that the rake was lowered enough to turn a losing or break-even player really into a winning player. I do think that it will make a difference if you're playing a high enough volume. And really, you should be able to find your own stats on this. I was just looking over my stats, lifetime head-to-head win rate by buy-in level. And honestly, like as I go up in stakes, it doesn't change that much. So at the $3 to $5 head-to-head level, 62% win rate. 6 to 11, 63% win rate. $12 to $27 buy-in, 64%. And then it starts to go down a little bit, $28 to $55, 62%, 56 to 109, 61% win rate, 110 to $215, 61%. And then 215 up to 5Ks, I don't have a huge sample there, but it's around 58%. So it starts to come down there. So, I would test it yourself. I would move up slowly if you want to move up and just see what kind of win rate you can establish. And if it starts to go down sharply and it's not compensated for in the lowered rake, then then I think you have your answer. All right. Now it is time for the listener questions. Everybody's favorite portion of the program. Producer Luke, hit the theme music. All right, question 1 comes from Dave Holmes. He says, would you let your daughter date a man who makes multiple cash lineups? Yeah, that's a good one. Gotten a lot of jokes. I deserve it. It certainly shows a lack of heart. And I really loathe to do it. I think only like maybe 3 or 4 times in the last few seasons have I played more than one cash lineup. But, in terms of dating my daughter, well, hang on. Of course, playing multiple cash lineups is a more cautious approach. You're less likely to have big swings. Your risk of ruin goes down. I mean, your penis size goes down as well, but regardless, So anyways, I think for my daughter, a man who plays 2 cash lineups, maybe that's okay. A little, conservatism, play it safe. Maybe that's okay. Question 2 comes from DFS PhD. He says, best manners, holding the elevator door and letting a woman out first, walking out of the elevator first in order to hold the main building door for her, letting her off the elevator first and then scrambling to beat her to the other door to hold, or is this all outdated fake chivalry? Well, yeah, I think you have to hold the elevator door and let her out first. I mean, that's just being a normal human, that's just being nice. I try to do that for everybody, male or female, no brainer. I think that's easy. After that, I think running ahead of her to open the next door is like psychopathic behavior. I mean, Jesus, like how big of a dork are you? How hard are you trying where you're running ahead of someone to open a door? Like, I think if there's no one there for her to open the door, I think she can open it herself in this spot, One thing I did see on Twitter recently was a woman saying that it's scary when she's at a hotel and it's just her and a dude on an elevator and they're going to the same floor and she gets off first. I mean, I get that, I'm so skeptical of everyone in society that actually does sound scary to me. not sure how to solve it, really. I mean, I'm not attacking any woman, obviously. I just want to go to my room. But yeah, I can see how that's a tough spot. So yeah, maybe we need to do some more thinking and some more sims on elevator strat. It's an interesting topic. Question 3 comes from friend of the show, Joe Holka. Check out all the stuff he's doing on YouTube. He says, do you find it easier or more difficult to project ownership in mid/high stakes GPPs? Seahawks ownership in the 1500 shocked me this week. Russ 10%, Lockett 12%, DK Metcalf 3%. Yeah, I mean, this goes back to a lot of the stuff that I've talked about the last few weeks with ownership and the stuff that I talked about at the beginning of this podcast. I think the game has evolved to a point where people are going to level themselves, and that's especially true at high stakes where a larger portion of the field knows what should be optimal. So people say, oh, well, I can't play Russ stacks. Everyone will have that. So then not enough people have it. And I really hate to keep making poker analogies, but people seem to get the one that I made last week. So I'll give another. There was a time a bit after Black Friday where you could see this battle between like the live regs, the brick and mortar casino regs, and the internet, quote unquote, internet kids. You could see this battle kind of happening. And the live regs were, they were mostly bad, but they weren't so dumb that they couldn't see what was happening. They see that these kids were just trying to run over the games, bluffing at way too high of a frequency. So they'd get looked up really light and the kids would lose a ton. One thing that was an obvious, no-brainer adjustment for me was understanding what I looked like, understanding my image. So, I look young. I'm always wearing a backwards hat, I dress like I'm in college, even though I'm 37, whatever. I play an aggressive style. People just assume that I'm some internet kid just out of my mind spewing it off constantly. So knowing that if you just play a straighter game a higher percentage of the time, certainly not all the time, but in the right fields, playing it straighter, i.e. strong when strong, weak when weak, I think your expectation is better. And this was a long time ago. I don't think that's really in play anymore or matters too much. I only bring it up because where we're at in DFS, maybe that's where things are going. In other words, strong when strong, weak when weak is going to be more of a strategy to think about. I don't know. I don't know if that's where we are in DFS now. It's just one idea that came to my mind. And one other thing is I'd also add that a ton more people at high stakes are late swapping. So what I mean by that is you get off to a bad start, like 95% of the field of, people across all stakes will just eat it. They'll take the loss. You get off to a bad start and you just stick with what you have. But at high stakes, if people get off to a bad start, they'll swap off their optimals, in this case, Russ, because they know they need to make up ground. So maybe, a bunch of people got off to bad starts at high stakes in week 9 and they swapped off Russ stacks, and maybe that's what happened too. So yeah, but it's definitely an interesting thing to think about. Question 4 comes from Justin. He says, do you agree that people who roster 1 p.m. players in the flex spot should have to forfeit any winnings? Yeah, I mean, let's not be too harsh on newer players. I'm sure a lot of them late swap never even crossed their mind. Like they didn't even know that it exists, which I understand. It's not a topic that's talked about too much. But yeah, I think most people only think of late swap as useful when there's injury news. But that's really just a small part of it. In head-to-heads where you're blocked, let's say I'm down 10 points going into the 4 p.m. slate. We both have one player left. I figure out the salaries and realize my opponent has the same player. Well, then I have to swap off. Otherwise, I'm drawing dead, obviously. If you're not doing that, you're just incinerating money. And honestly, I don't do it in every game. Obviously, that's impossible. I'm tracking my highest stake stuff and trying to adjust there. Another part of late swap is just like what I talked about in Joe's question, just the previous question I just did. Bad start, time to get a little wild. So yeah, just a couple things there on late swap for people who haven't been thinking about it. Next question comes from Tim Parker. He says, thoughts on adult males wearing shorts on an airplane? I've heard this before and I never really understood the issue. Like, why is it weird to wear shorts on a plane? Is it because we're sitting close to other people? Is it because the seats are super dirty and we don't want our bare skin on them? Like, I can dig those responses, I guess. But, if it's hot here in Philadelphia and I'm going somewhere hot, I'm not wearing pants. All right. That is going to do it for another edition of the solo pod. We'll be back on Thursday for the 3-man with Al and Pete. Get in the listener league. So, for Jerry, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody. We are promoters at DraftKings and also avid fans. Our usernames are Adam Levitan, Al Smizzle, and CSU Ram 88. We may sometimes play on our personal accounts in the games that we offer advice on. Although we have expressed our personal view on the games and strategies in this podcast, they do not necessarily reflect the views of DraftKings, and we also may deploy different players and strategies than what we recommended in this podcast.